Hello, my name is Jordan Krizik, and here's my EDL 851 case study. Establish the facts. What has happened? The principal is evaluating Mrs. Stevens' classroom and is favoring not renewing her contract. There is poor discipline and student involvement is lacking in Mrs. Stevens' classroom, but Mrs. Stevens is stating the school district has not given her the proper training to control and involve the students. When and where did the events occur? The principal has observed Mrs. Stevens' classroom a few times before the students, with the students not sufficiently involved. Thursday, the principal met with Mrs. Stevens to go over what he observed, and Mrs. Stevens was irritable and hostile to the suggestions made. Who was involved? The principal, Mrs. Stevens, and the students. Legal or ethical issues. Has anyone been harmed by the action or decision of another, and if so, in what way? Is there physical harm? No. Emotional harm? Potentially yes. With the decision not to renew Mrs. Stevens' contract, this could make her emotionally disturbed. Does the action or the situation contravene in existing law? Every state is different, but no due process or no tenure cases. This could break a law. Was there a breach of contract? Were the actions discriminatory or constituted harassment? If by not renewing the contract on the grounds that she does not control her classroom well, there needs to be specific documentation that states what is happening in Mrs. Stevens' classroom. There needs to be a warning and professional development needs to be implemented. A synthesis of what has happened. Mrs. Stevens has been observed throughout the school year and shows a lack of student motivation and involvement. She has been hostile to the principal and will take legal actions if the outcome does not favor her interests. Synthesize of the facts. People. Mrs. Stevens, the principal, the teacher supervisor, which that is unknown. The text did not tell us, and the students as well. But that is unknown for the age group or the demographic. Place. Mrs. Stevens' classroom and the principal's office. This is where this has all occurred. The text does not give us the grade level or the subject that Mrs. Stevens currently teaches. Review and prioritize the information. Could the conflict, the situation, or the decision be made damaging to stakeholders or to the community? Yes, Mrs. Stevens will take legal action if the outcome does not favor her interests. The school would be caught up in legal actions and legal fees that is costly to a school district and a community. What individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? The school administration will be in large part of this because if they lose the battle, the administration will be seen as individuals who lack teacher support and are inadequate to run a school. Also, the taxpayers, the community members will have to pay for the legal fees. Have all of the relevant stakeholders been consulted? From the text, it does not appear so. Can I learn more about the situations? Yes, you can look back at records for previous evaluations and review those. Any other documentation that may be a negative effect on Mrs. Stevens. Do I know enough to make a decision? At this time, I feel yes. Options and possible consequences. Option 1, you can take no action. Do not rehire Mrs. Stevens. Hope that Mrs. Stevens is not serious when she states she will take legal action. Option 2, allow Mrs. Stevens to come back, but Mrs. Stevens will be given a mentor and an action plan that will be followed for the future rehire. Guidelines will be established and policies are to be adhered to during this next full year of teaching. Option 3, you can fold for Mrs. Stevens. Allow Mrs. Stevens to continue to teach with no repercussions of her actions. Complete another evaluation with above average marks. Evaluate the options. Option 1, this may bring the school district under legal fire. Also, put the principal under fire for not rehiring a teacher on the basis of she has bad classroom management. If Ms. Stevens does not take legal action, then you can focus on hiring a new teacher that would fit the teacher mold. Option 2. Mrs. Stevens may still be the same teacher once she has had time to improve her teaching and classroom management. Possible she does not care for teaching and is just looking for a paycheck. But if she chooses to change, she will be allowed the opportunity for professional development and get a mentor for the school district that has many years of experience. This will allow for her to ask questions and get feedback for different classroom strategies. Option 3 will not have legal fees for the school or administrators, but you would still have the same problems occurring in Mrs. Stevens' classrooms. The best option. I believe the best option would be option 2. This will allow for you to retain a teacher and be able to mold them into an educator that fits your school district. Will be a time for Mrs. Stevens to get a mentor and also see the certain guidelines and procedures that need to be met in order for her to be rehired for the next school year. Gives Mrs. Stevens the opportunities to become a better teacher than if she still chooses not to capitalize on the opportunities. Then you do not have to rehire her. Make sure all school administrators are in the room when the guidelines and procedures are presented to Ms. Stevens. Implementing the decision. Bring in all the school administration and lay down the rules and policies that need to be followed for Mrs. Stevens. Set up a mentor program for Mrs. Stevens or also any other teachers in the building who may be lacking those classroom management skills, or who also just needs questions in general with teaching, who need additional help in the classroom. Bring Mrs. Stevens in for a meeting to discuss guidelines and rules for the upcoming school year. Both the administration and Ms. Stevens sign a contract over the discussed items and file a contract away for later. You review evaluation policies and procedures for next year's purposes. If there would be a plan B, you can schedule a meeting with Mrs. Stevens with a signed contract and the terms that were mutually agreed upon. Mrs. Stevens has failed to uphold her side of the contract and inform her that she will not be rehired for the next school year.